Okay, so in the previous video, we went through and wrote the code in our Python program to calculate or to ask a question for addition and subtraction. Now, our end goal in what we're trying to accomplish with this program is to have the program ask these questions over and over for a certain number of times. And so there's a couple things to understand about a Python program and the way that this runs and the way that it works compared to other languages where you compile the languages. So when a Python program runs, what happens is Python is actually a program itself that runs on the computer. It loads this file into its memory and it starts to execute the file from the very top to the very bottom. And so you can kind of think about it just like you were to come in here and start reading the commands that are in here. And so when it says from random import everything, imagine going out and finding the package, the file that has the random code in it, copying all the code that is in that file and pasting it up here at the top of this control or of this file. So you end up just taking everything that's in any of the imports that you have, you go over, grab the code that's in those files, and you copy and paste them into the top of your file. And so this is just a cleaner way to go about doing it because you're not having to physically sit here and look at the code. It just does it when you run the program. So your code actually consists of the things that are below this from. But what we want to do is we want to actually execute this code over and over. So we need to either come in here and wrap this code in a while loop, which will let it loop and loop and loop for however long we want to loop, or we want to do a for loop where we specifically tell it to loop 10 times. So the question is how do we want to go about doing this? Well, one of the things that you want to do when you're laying out a program is you want to try to keep your program clean. You want to make it easy to look at and figure out what's going on. And so the way that you do that is with what's called a function. So we have all of the addition and subtraction code sitting here to actually do a single addition or subtraction problem. But what I'd rather have is I'd rather have a function that when I call the function, it automatically does what it's supposed to do and then returns back to where it's supposed to, where the code came from. And this will make more sense here in just a second. And so what we're going to do first is we want to turn all of this code into a function. And so we're going to jump over here to DuckDuckGo and we're going to type in Python function. So we know this is called a function, and we'll just say example. So we want to see an example of a Python function. So we'll just click on one of these and scroll down here. And so what it looks like is we need to put the keyword def, D-E-F, in front of whatever we want to name our function. And then any parameters that you have will go inside the parentheses, and then you'll have a colon that goes in after that so that you can tell it to end that particular function. And then everything that's in the function just gets tabbed over. So let's see if we can make this work. So what we're going to do is we're going to say def, and we're going to say, we'll call our function add subtract. And then we'll have our open and close parentheses. Right now we don't need any parameters to get passed in because our function is doing all the work itself. And so then what we're going to do is we're going to have to come down through here and tab all of this stuff over. And I'm sorry for the slowness here because I actually use the VI editor and I haven't set that up in the Visual Code yet, so I don't know exactly how this works with this type of a setup. All right, so that thing wasn't in the right spot, so let's get that lined up. As we learned in the previous video, it's very important where these things are lining up. And so this code here, we're going to tab this over, but we actually are, we actually are going to delete this because we don't really need to print that exactly the way we have it. So let's think about what we have right now. So we have a function. So we've moved our code into a function. It's only got, generally when you do this, you want to make sure that you only have one thing that this function is doing. You don't want to have a function that does a whole bunch of different things, because then it just gets confusing again. So we're going to say this function adds and subtracts. All right, so let's see if this is actually going to work. So what we're going to do is we're going to come down here to the very bottom. And so the function should be made up of all the code that is inside that. And so now we need to actually call the function. So we're going to tell it to add, subtract. And so that should actually call the add subtract function that we defined up here. So the definition of the function is all this code that is inside of this function, and then this is where we call it. So if you think about what's going on, the Python program loads this file, it inserts all of the random code here. It then comes in and says that we have defined a function called add subtract. It puts all the code that makes up that particular function, and then down here we actually call the add subtract function. And so if we run this, it should look and act exactly like it did before. So let's just go up here and we're going to go to run without debugging. And so you can see down here in the bottom, it's saying 78 minus, or 7 minus 48. So that's going to be a negative 41. And then we'll hit enter, and it tells us good job. And then it prints out all the answers and stuff over here. So let's clean up what happens when we actually answer. So we don't, let's see. So right now it's given us the answer. So we could still put that in there. But let's say we print, we'll print, let's see, we got good job up there. So we could, we don't need to print this stuff because it's not really helping us. We just put that in there to help us debug it earlier. And so the question is we don't need to print the answer if they got it right. The only time we need to print the answer is if they got it wrong. So we could say print, and we'll say the correct answer was, and we're not giving them another opportunity to do this. So let's go up here and test this. So we're going to say wrong answer, and then we're going to add in here the print and say the correct answer was, and then we're going to add the answer there. So let's see what happens. I'm not sure if we can add this like this. We'll find out here in just a second. So we're going to tell it to run again. So now I'm going to put in the wrong answer. And so it came back and it said wrong answer. The correct answer was 44. So we'll try this again. So 43 plus 6. So we're going to put in 5, and it says wrong answer was 5. So we put the wrong variable over here. So our variable is the answer that we actually entered, not the answer of the actual problem. So what we've got to do is we need to get first plus second num in this case. So we're going to come down here and replace this with first num plus second num. And then we're going to replace this with first num plus, or first num minus second num. So now let's try that again. All right, so it wants an answer. We're going to put in 44. All right, so we got a problem. And notice the problem here is that we're back to that int and string, because we can't print a string and an integer at the same time. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to actually do our string function that we did up here. So we're just going to add str to the beginning of this parenthesis that we put. So we're going to try to turn first number minus and first number plus into a string so that it can print in that. And let's see if that's going to fix our problem. So there's our problem. We're going to put in 44. And so it comes back and says wrong answer. The correct answer was 57. So that takes care of that problem. But now our next dilemma is we want this thing to ask us for an answer or for the question 10 times. We want to make it loop through and do this 10 times. Now there's a couple different ways to do it. A while loop will loop forever, or we can tell it to loop while something is less than a certain value. Or what I'd probably use if we're going to do a specific count, a number of times that we want to count, is I'd probably use a for loop here so that we can actually tell it to only loop for 10 times. So let's jump back over here to our browser and we're going to do another search. And so this time we're going to do Python for loop. So we're looking for a loop. And so now we're going to come in here and let's just see what's in here. And so we have 4x in fruits, and that's looping through that, but we want a range. So we want to loop for a certain range. So let's see if they have something like that. Here we go. So 4x in range 6. So this looks like it would loop 6 times to ask us the question, and it tells us note that range 6 is not the values of 0 to 6, but the values of 0 to 5. So this is the upper limit. 6 is the upper limit of what we're going to actually be counting. And remember, 0 is our first range. We start with 0. So this means this will count 5 times. So what we want to do is 4x in range 11, and that'll give us 10 questions. So let's jump back over here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say 4x in range 11 because we want 10 times to loop. And then I think it had a colon on the end. And then we want to take our add and subtract, and we want to tab it over so that it is part of this range, this for group that we're doing. So now let's run this again and see what happens. So we're going to say run without debugging, and it says 53 plus 6. So we'll just put in 59. And so it says good job, and now it's asking another question. So 54, I'm going to put a wrong answer in, another question. Just go through here. Okay, and then it exits after 10 questions. So the only thing that I'd like to do now is you'll notice that everything's jammed together here. It'd be nice if we put a little bit of space in between there. So let's add, after we do the add and subtract, let's add another print command here. And I'm going to use a special character here, which is a carriage return. So we're telling it to print 2 carriage returns. So a \n is what you put in there to tell it to give you some space to go ahead and hit return for us. So let's see if that actually does what we want it to. All right, so now you can see that we're getting some space in between each of our questions. So what we have done is right now we still have some cleanup to do. As you can see, when I hit enter without putting a number in, it crashed, and the reason is because it can't do that string conversion because it doesn't have numbers to add these, and it isn't even the string. It's the fact that we tried to add the first and second number, and we're looking for an answer, and answer doesn't exist, and so it exited out of the application. So we don't really want it to exit out of the application, so we're going to have to figure out how to trap a blank character so that we can keep it running. But we at least have something working here to help us with our addition and subtraction. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to write another function that's going to help us with our multiplication tables.